My name is Alec. I'm 27 years old. If you want to understand my family, my older brother Grant, and my parents Laura and Robert, it boils down to one simple toxic truth. Performance is always prioritized over substance. That means a polished veneer, the right zip code, and leased German cars matter more than integrity or kindness. For years, I've been the quiet observer, the one who preferred Python scripts to social events, the guy who got a full ride to school, and spent 4 years quietly building what I called just a side project. That project wasn't just a success. It was a quiet, colossal exit that sold for over $300 million. That's enough money to live 10 lives, yet they still look at me with condescending pity. They assume I'm floundering because I don't wear a tailored suit or seek their approval. They never bothered to ask what I was actually building. They just saw an easy target, a quiet kid they could dismiss. And that's exactly what happened the night my brother brought his new girlfriend Felicity to dinner. She didn't just insult my low-key lifestyle. She insulted me, the very core of my identity. She thought she had the power to crush me with a single toxic phrase backed up by my own parents' humiliating demand to leave the table. But what they didn't know was that I had already secured the contract, signed the deals, and that dinner was simply the first countdown to ignition. If this story stirred something in you, rage relief, or that quiet thrill of justice served, tell me in the comments. Subscribe for more tales of reckoning, like if you felt that satisfaction deep in your soul. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it's simply becoming untouchable. The dinner table that night wasn't a place for eating, it was a stage for performance. I arrived exactly 15 minutes late, a small silent protest, and found my brother Grant and his new fiancée Felicity already seated with Laura and Robert. Grant, 29, was in a perfectly pressed blue shirt looking like a glossy magazine spread that hadn't earned its place. Felicity, early 30s, was wearing a sleek black designer dress, her face a mask of calculated poise. She had the kind of aggressive confidence you usually only see in bad real estate ads. My mom Laura looked me up and down, her thin smile twitching into a grimace. "Alec," she sighed, the disappointment hanging in the air like burnt toast. "We were just about to start. Couldn't you have changed out of that sweatshirt?" I ignored the comment, nodding curtly to my dad Robert, who just gave a neutral, peacekeeping nod back. I slid into the only empty seat, the one furthest from Felicity. Grant cleared his throat, leaning back. My man finally shows up. "Look, I told Felicity you were still finding your footing, post-sale burnout. But you gotta step up the presentation, bro." I met his gaze evenly. Burnout is usually a side effect of actually working, Grant, which is something you haven't experienced since your ill-fated premium dog food subscription startup. Laura cleared her throat sharply, but Grant ignored me, laughing loudly. "Good one, man. Look, Felicity here is the real deal. High-end finance. She's moving serious capital, not writing niche code in a basement." Felicity turned her dazzling artificial smile toward me. "It's different worlds, Alec. Grant told me you sold your first company, which is great, but running a real asset management fund handling significant investor capital that takes alpha energy. Not just, a hoodie and Red Bull." It was the same condescending joke I'd heard 1,000 times, only sharper now, delivered by a stranger who saw me as competition for the family spotlight. Robert chuckled weakly, lifting his wine glass. "She's right, Alec. Professionalism matters." We settled into small talk that revolved entirely around Felicity's vague but successful financial ventures and Grant's supposed strategic involvement in them, a role I knew was pure fantasy. I stayed quiet, occasionally offering a single non-committal word, letting them bask in their smug echo chamber. Then the attack became personal, exactly as I expected. Right after the roast, which as always was overcooked, Felicity leaned across the table. She looked me over from my worn jeans to my simple, untailored shirt. "You know, Alec," she began, her voice dropping a little, meant for maximum impact, I was going to suggest that Grant and I could introduce you to some of our contacts, maybe an entry-level position at a local firm. But honestly, you carry yourself like someone who hasn't left the house in a week. It's unprofessional. She paused, then delivered the blow. Darling, you actually smell like a sewer. The air froze. Grant gave a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Laura's eyes narrowed into slits. Felicity, Laura exclaimed, but her tone was more embarrassed by the directness than horrified by the insult. I felt the familiar bitter weight of years of quiet contempt and dismissal twist in my gut. I didn't get angry, I got cold. I simply stared at Felicity, my expression flat. Robert tried to neutralize the moment, but he aimed his passive aggression directly at me. Alec, honey, she didn't mean it that way. But look, maybe next time we have important guests, why don't you just wait until after dinner to come over? Just avoid the awkwardness. Don't sit and eat with us. That was the line. The final humiliating command. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled thinly, a slow, calculated smile that didn't reach my eyes. Just as the silence stretched thin and Felicity's smirk returned, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out slowly, deliberately. The lock screen flashed with the caller ID Chloe, Compliance Counsel. Felicity, whose eyes were still fixed on me, saw the name and the professional-looking headshot beneath it. Her eyes widened. The confident mask shattered, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated fear. It was a name, or perhaps a title. She recognized a name that signaled the exact kind of authority she spent her life trying to avoid. I answered the call, my voice barely above a whisper. Alec speaking? The voice on the other end was smooth, low, and clear. It cut through the stunned silence of the dining room like a surgical knife. It's been taken care of, boss. I hung up without another word, my eyes locking onto Felicity's. Her smile had disappeared instantly. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly ajar. She whispered, the fear vibrating in her throat. No way. How is that possible? I ignored her, placing the phone back on the table. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly, the sound echoing loudly in the silent room. Excuse me, I said to the table, my tone neutral, professional. It seems I have a matter of some consequence to attend to. I didn't wait for another minute. I walked out of their house, leaving behind the yellow light and the smell of hypocrisy. The air outside was crisp, and the sudden shift from the suffocating dining room made me breathe deeper. I was driving home, but my mind was no longer focused on the personal sting of the insults. It was focused entirely on strategy. That dinner had confirmed two things. First, that my family would always choose their precious image over my integrity. And second, that Felicity was far more than just Grant's trophy girlfriend. She was running something complex enough to recognize a highly specific contact like Chloe. I pulled over 2 blocks from my house, parking on a quiet residential street, and immediately called Chloe, my compliance counsel. Sorry, Chloe, I said. I was dealing with a minor family emergency. Did you get the documents I forwarded? Chloe's voice was all business. The initial batch is clean, Alec. The acquisition documents for your new holding company are finalized. But that's not why you called me back. What did she say? I briefly recounted the dinner, focusing on Felicity's specific frantic reaction to her name and title. She runs an asset management fund through a shell corporation called Apex Capital Strategies. I need a deep dive, Chloe. Everything. Legal status filings, bank accounts, and particularly any ties to low-level retail investment. I want to know if this is just arrogance or actual criminal activity. Apex Capital Strategies, Chloe repeated, typing. Got it. I'll flag it for enhanced scrutiny, starting with the beneficial ownership registry. 2 days later, she was sitting across from me in my home office, a secure, soundproofed room that Laura and Robert believed was just my spare bedroom. Chloe laid out a series of legal documents and flowcharts. It's bad, Alec. Worse than arrogance. Felicity is running a classic pump and dump operation, but she's running it through a network of shell companies. Apex is just the front. The money is being funneled through a handful of domestic limited liability companies based in Delaware and Nevada, classic phantom entities. These shell companies are being used to mask the true beneficial owners and the source of the capital, which screams one thing to the SEC: wire fraud and potentially money laundering. I looked at the flowchart. Felicity was soliciting investments, small amounts, usually $10,000 to $50,000, from everyday investors promising impossible crypto returns. She was using a simplified pre-built algorithm as her proprietary technology. And Grant? I asked, pointing to a box that linked one of the LLCs to a personal bank account. Grant's involvement is circumstantial but damning, Chloe stated. He's listed as a silent partner on one of the smaller LLCs. His bank accounts are being used to receive small initial transfers likely to mix legitimate funds with illegal proceeds. If this thing blows up, he's criminally linked. And here's the kicker. The money being funneled through the wire transfers often touches his, and by extension your parents' shared accounts. It's what FinCEN calls commingling. Felicity wasn't a successful high-end financier. She was a clever retail fraudster using the prestige of my family's name and Grant's polished image to attract victims. And the family's obsession with appearances had blinded them, making them willing accomplices. The proprietary technology, I mused, tapping the chart. Where did she get her hands on the algorithm she's using? Chloe looked up, a hint of realization dawning in her eyes. It's a stripped-down early-stage predictive model. It looks familiar. Almost like a prototype of the one you built and licensed 3 years ago. The one Grant constantly joked was too simple for real finance. The realization hit me with the force of an actual physical blow. They hadn't just mocked my work. They had stolen a core piece of my intellectual property, my original code, and were using it as the engine for a massive criminal scam. They hadn't respected me enough to ask what I was building, but they certainly hadn't respected me enough not to steal it. Felicity didn't recognize my name on the phone, Chloe. She recognized your title, Compliance Counsel. She knows she's operating outside the law. She's smart, but she's not careful. I leaned back in my chair, the chill spreading through me. She thinks I'm a joke. Grant thinks he's finally winning. Laura and Robert think this is just some awkward phase. It's time to show them that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. I looked at Chloe. I want to see the original sales contract for that code, the one I drew up and signed when I sold the first company. I need to check one specific, very obscure clause. The documents arrived the next morning. Thick stacks of paper meticulously indexed. I spent hours poring over the initial licensing and sales agreement for my first company's core technology, the very code that Felicity was now exploiting for her scam. Grant and my parents had always considered me a naive engineer, more concerned with algorithms than amortization schedules. When I negotiated the sale, they laughed at my insistence on including layers of legal safeguards. They had dismissed it as my typical overthinking. But the laughter stopped when I found the exact paragraph I was looking for: Section 4, 12 Compliance Clawback Clause, and Intellectual Property Reversion. I called Chloe immediately. Section 4.12. Read it aloud. Chloe read the dense legal text. In the event the licensed intellectual property is demonstrably utilized in a manner that constitutes a material violation of federal financial regulations, including but not limited to wire fraud, securities fraud, or non-compliance with FinCEN anti-money laundering AML directives, the licensor, that's me, retains the immediate irrevocable right to terminate the license, demand the return of the core IP, and crucially notify the relevant regulatory bodies of the material breach and associated illicit activity. It was a hidden dagger. When I sold that company, I had insisted on that clause not out of malice but out of professional integrity. My code was clean, and I wasn't going to have it used by some crooked firm for shady deals. The original buyers didn't care. They saw it as a low-risk technical formality. Grant and Felicity, in their haste and arrogance to steal and modify the prototype for their small-time scam, had never bothered to check the foundational contract of the underlying IP. They're using a prototype of the code which is technically still linked to that original license agreement, I explained to Chloe. And their current activity is textbook wire fraud and AML violation. This clause gives me the legal high ground to not only reclaim the IP, but to legitimately trigger a federal investigation. This was better than simple revenge. This was justice delivered by legal precision. They couldn't accuse me of being vengeful. I would simply be enforcing a contract. The trick now was to ensure they continued their criminal activity long enough for the evidence to be overwhelming and the regulatory bodies to move. I needed them to feel safe. I decided to set the bait. I texted Grant, breaking my silence for the first time since the dinner. Alec, hey Grant. Sorry about the scene the other night. Stressful month. Ended up pulling the plug on my current project. Taking a break for a bit. Need to clear my head. I knew this message would go straight to Felicity. And I was right. 10 minutes later, Grant replied, full of forced sympathy. Grant, tough break, bro. See, finance is brutal. Tell you what, we can chat later. Maybe Felicity can toss some of your residual money into one of her secure funds. Get well soon, man. It was the perfect response. They thought I was beaten retreating, licking my wounds. They believed I was suffering the post-sale burnout Grant had joked about. They saw an opportunity to exploit my residual money and solidify their superiority. They were blind with greed and overconfidence, believing that the quiet kid was out of the game. Felicity would see that message and push her scam harder, believing her powerful enemy was neutralized. She would leverage Grant's accounts even more, digging her own grave deeper under the weight of federal jurisdiction. I didn't reply again. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the right moment to execute the final steps with FinCEN and the SEC. My revenge would be legal, strategic, and definitive. The documents arrived the next morning, thick stacks of paper meticulously indexed. I spent hours poring over the initial licensing and sales agreement for my first company's core technology, the very code that Felicity was now exploiting for her scam. Grant and my parents had always considered me a naive engineer, more concerned with algorithms than amortization schedules. When I negotiated the sale, they laughed at my insistence on including layers of legal safeguards. They had dismissed it as my typical overthinking. But the laughter stopped when I found the exact paragraph I was looking for. Section 412, Compliance Clawback Clause and Intellectual Property Reversion. I called Chloe immediately. Section 412. Read it aloud. Chloe read the dense legal text. In the event the licensed intellectual property is demonstrably utilized in a manner that constitutes a material violation of federal financial regulations, including but not limited to wire fraud, securities fraud, or non-compliance with FinCEN anti-money laundering AML directives. The licensor, that's me, retains the immediate irrevocable right to terminate the license demand, the return of the core IP, and crucially notify the relevant regulatory bodies of the material breach and associated illicit activity. It was a hidden dagger. When I sold that company, I had insisted on that clause not out of malice, but out of professional integrity. My code was clean, and I wasn't going to have it used by some crooked firm for shady deals. The original buyers didn't care. They saw it as a low-risk technical formality. Grant and Felicity, in their haste and arrogance to steal and modify the prototype for their small-time scam, had never bothered to check the foundational contract of the underlying IP. They're using a prototype of the code which is technically still linked to that original license agreement, I explained to Chloe. And their current activity is textbook wire fraud and AML violation. This clause gives me the legal high ground to not only reclaim the IP, but to legitimately trigger a federal investigation. This was better than simple revenge. This was justice delivered by legal precision. They couldn't accuse me of being vengeful. I would simply be enforcing a contract. The trick now was to ensure they continued their criminal activity long enough for the evidence to be overwhelming and the regulatory bodies to move. I needed them to feel safe. I decided to set the bait. I texted Grant, breaking my silence for the first time since the dinner. Alec, hey Grant. Sorry about the scene the other night. Stressful month. Ended up pulling the plug on my current project. Taking a break for a bit. Need to clear my head. I knew this message would go straight to Felicity. And I was right. 10 minutes later, Grant replied, full of forced sympathy. Grant, tough break, bro. See, finance is brutal. Tell you what, we can chat later. Maybe Felicity can toss some of your residual money into one of her secure funds. Get well soon, man. It was the perfect response. They thought I was beaten retreating, licking my wounds. They believed I was suffering the post-sale burnout Grant had joked about. They saw an opportunity to exploit my residual money and solidify their superiority. They were blind with greed and overconfidence, believing that the quiet kid was out of the game. Felicity would see that message and push her scam harder, believing her powerful enemy was neutralized. She would leverage Grant's accounts even more, digging her own grave deeper under the weight of federal jurisdiction. I didn't reply again. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the right moment to execute the final steps with FinCEN and the SEC. My revenge would be legal, strategic, and definitive. 2 months passed in an unnatural silence. I completely dropped off their radar, refusing calls and deflecting texts. My parents, Laura and Robert, interpreted this as shame and defeat, which was exactly what I wanted. Grant and Felicity, believing my failure was confirmed, used the time to aggressively scale up their fraudulent operation, all while basking in the glow of their impending nuptials. The engagement party was Laura's masterpiece, a carefully curated spectacle at a boutique event hall an hour outside the city, designed to cement the family's image. I received an invitation, a passive-aggressive olive branch that read, "We hope you'll come. Family is everything." I RSVP'd yes, +1. I arrived at the party with Chloe. She wasn't just my lawyer, she was my strategic partner in this demolition. She wore an impeccably tailored navy suit, maintaining the perfect air of a professional acquaintance, a detail that both confused and irritated my parents. Alec. Laura greeted me, her eyes darting to Chloe. Who is this, dear? I thought you were taking a break. This is Chloe, I said smoothly. She's advising me on some long-term investment strategy related to my residual assets, purely technical. Felicity and Grant glided over, radiating false goodwill. Felicity, in a shimmering white dress, offered a condescending air-kiss embrace. Alec, you clean up nicely. Good to see you venturing out of the house. Chloe, darling, which firm are you with? Grant and I are moving into major M&A soon. We're always looking for good compliance people. Grant chimed in, slinging an arm around Felicity. Yeah, we're about to close a massive seed round for Apex. Multi-million-dollar deal. We're talking real money now, Alec. Nothing small time. It's the kind of money that lets you buy a Tesla instead of leasing one. He delivered the punchline with a wink, thinking he was winning. They genuinely believed their scam was untouchable now that I was gone. Felicity, feeling confident, couldn't resist dropping veiled information that she thought only she understood. We've had to do some tricky maneuvering with the capital. Lots of overseas transfers and structuring the beneficial ownership registry, but Chloe probably understands that. It's all about protecting our assets from unprofessional oversight. I nodded, watching her smugness. This was the moment for my final private warning, one she would certainly ignore. I leaned in, my voice low. The beneficial ownership registry. Tricky indeed. I hope you're running rigorous KYC protocols, Felicity, especially concerning the new FinCEN 311 guidelines. The penalties for non-compliance, particularly when commingling funds across multiple LLCs, can lead to immediate asset seizure and federal prosecution. It's not just a fine, it's a mandatory shutdown. Felicity froze. The technical jargon FinCEN KYC 311 was the language of law enforcement she knew she was flouting. Her face lost some color, but her ingrained arrogance quickly resurfaced. She forced a bright laugh. "Oh, Alec. Always so technical. Don't worry your head about the big league stuff. We have excellent people handling the paperwork. Enjoy the champagne." She dismissed me, but I knew I'd successfully planted the seed of doubt, which she immediately smothered with overconfidence. She had enough information now to stop, but her greed wouldn't let her. A few minutes later, I signaled Chloe. We retreated to a quiet balcony overlooking the garden ceremony setup. "They're moving forward with a major funding round now, Chloe. That means the money is liquid and the evidence of wire fraud is at its peak. It's time for the final push." Chloe opened her secure laptop. "I have the finalized filing with the SEC ready, detailing the use of your licensed IP in the fraudulent scheme. More importantly, the FinCEN referral is packaged. Once we file, the compliance clawback clause is legally triggered, and the asset freeze order can be issued within 48 hours. I looked out at the glittering, superficial party, the ultimate display of my family's prized image. "Not 48 hours, Chloe. I want this to happen during our little family meeting on Thursday. I want them to hear the call, see their world collapse in real time. We're not filing yet. We're waiting for the perfect, most dramatic moment." I needed to see the moment the performance ended and the reality hit. Thursday arrived. The meeting was set for 5 p.m. in Robert's home office, a dark, overly polished room dominated by mahogany and obsolete status symbols. Grant, Felicity, Laura, Robert, and I were all present. The atmosphere was thick with forced familial goodwill. Laura had called it a truce talk to move past the silly dinner drama. Grant and Felicity were ecstatic. They were just hours away from closing their largest funding round, yet a transaction that would inject millions in stolen retail money into Apex, sealing their fraudulent scheme. They were confident, untouchable. Alec Robert began placing a hand on my shoulder. "We know you've been going through a rough patch, but family is everything. Felicity and Grant are willing to let bygones be bygones." Felicity flashed a brilliant, patronizing smile. "Look, Alec, we understand you lost your project, but we need reliable people. Why don't you come work for us? We're setting up a new administrative support division. Its entry-level pays well enough and you'll get out of that little house of yours." Grant leaned in conspiratorially. "Yeah, we can give you a $20,000 bonus right now. Just sign this non-disclosure. You'll be on the inside." They were offering me $20,000 to be their glorified assistant and keep silent about their multi-million-dollar federal crime. I finally spoke my voice calm and low. "You're offering me $20,000 for my silence while you leverage a stolen algorithm for an operation that exposes this family to federal wire fraud charges." The change in their faces was immediate. The smiles vanished. "What are you talking about?" Grant stammered, his facade finally cracking. Felicity recovered faster. "Alec, don't be ridiculous. You're upset. The code is proprietary. It's ours. You sold your company." "I did sell my company." I conceded, pulling out my phone, the same phone from the dinner, and placing it on the desk. "But I never sold the compliance clawback clause in Section 412 of the original license agreement." I looked directly at Felicity. "You and Grant took a stripped-down prototype of my IP and built a phantom company structure around it. You used domestic shell companies to skirt FinCEN AML regulations. You're running a textbook retail investment scam linked to wire fraud. That constitutes a material violation of the original licensing terms and it triggers the clause." Grant was pale, looking wildly at Robert and Laura, who were staring at me as if I were a stranger. "What clause? What is he talking about?" Felicity's eyes darted to the phone. She knew exactly what I was talking about. She had ignored the low probability of that clause ever being enforced. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Chloe this time. I called the direct regulatory contact Chloe had provided, the one with the SEC's Enforcement Division. I put the phone on speaker, the official professional voice filling the room. Agent Davis, Alec here. I'm calling to officially submit the material evidence packet and activate the compliance clawback for the licensed IP used by Apex Capital Strategies, effective immediately. Please confirm the asset freeze and cease and desist order has been issued. A pause, heavy and complete. The agent's voice was sharp and clear. Mr. Alec confirmed. The temporary restraining order and asset freeze against Apex Capital Strategies, all associated shell corporations and linked personal accounts, has been issued by the Federal District Court. All assets are currently under FinCEN control. We have also initiated a full-scale federal investigation into wire fraud and money laundering activity. Silence. Felicity screamed, a high-pitched raw sound of total panic leaping for her purse. Grant stood trembling, staring at the floor. Laura rushed towards me, grabbing my arm, her voice hysterical. Alec! What did you do? Robert, stop him. This is Grant's company. You've ruined us. I gently pulled my arm away. I looked at the three of them. Laura, Robert, and Grant, the architects of a lifetime of quiet contempt and this final criminal deception. I didn't ruin you. I stated, my voice steady. I simply enforced a contract. The performance is over. Just then, a discreet, sharp knock came at the front door, the sound of reality arriving. The knock at the door signaled the final act. It wasn't the police, not immediately, but two impeccably dressed federal agents carrying folders. Chloe had arranged for them to arrive precisely 5 minutes after the asset freeze confirmation. Felicity, recognizing the severity of the situation and the fact that her fraudulent structure had been annihilated down to the last penny, screamed for Grant to get her a lawyer before realizing every account was frozen. She rushed out of the room, attempting to physically hide, only to be intercepted by the agents who politely informed her she was now a material witness in a federal investigation. Grant collapsed into his leather chair, a defeated, empty shell. His swagger, his alpha energy, everything dissolved instantly. He was facing immediate financial collapse and severe legal jeopardy, not for being a good businessman, but for being an oblivious accomplice in a high-stakes crime. I stayed in the office watching the wreckage. Laura and Robert followed me, their faces contorted not with remorse, but with pure, self-centered rage. Laura pointed a trembling finger at me. You did this to your own brother. You betrayed your family. You know what this looks like. You have completely destroyed our reputation. The club, the neighbors, they'll know everything. Robert backed her up, his voice cracking. We were just trying to help Grant get back on his feet. Why would you do this? You have enough money, Alec. You could have just walked away. You've embarrassed the family. That was it. The ultimate accusation. Not that they almost lost millions in stolen funds, but that they were embarrassed. I looked at them not with anger, but with the cold, detached finality of a judge delivering a sentence. This was the moment of ultimate severance. Embarrassed. I repeated, my voice dropping the last remnants of any familial affection. You asked me, Mr. Robert, not to sit at your dinner table. You allowed Mrs. Laura, a stranger, to call me garbage and never once stood up for your son. You all chose performance over my famgia, my worth, every single time. I didn't destroy your image. I simply stopped upholding your lie. I paused and I changed my address completely. I looked at Grant, slumped in the chair. Grant, you used the code I built to run a crime. The consequences are yours. You are responsible for your debt, your shame, and your criminal exposure. I looked back at my parents, who were stunned by the total lack of warmth, the formal distance in my words. My actions today were not about revenge, I concluded. They were about freedom. Freedom from a family that values a fake, polished smile over integrity. That contract, the one you never bothered to check, guaranteed my integrity. It guaranteed that my work would never be used for fraud. By enforcing it, I ensured that I am now completely untouchable by your toxicity. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer a lifeline. I didn't apologize for the havoc. I simply confirmed the inevitable, the family bond, the source of my quiet pain and their cruel arrogance was permanently severed. I walked out of the office past the federal agents and didn't look back. I left them standing there, trapped in the wreckage of their precious image, facing the true painful consequences of financial crime. In America, absolute loss of reputation, assets, and legal freedom. The true value of a person is not the image they project, but the integrity they protect. If the people closest to you choose to dismiss your worth for their own vanity, the only path to peace is to become so strong, so legally and financially sound, that their toxicity can no longer reach you. You can achieve justice, but sometimes achieving freedom means accepting that family is simply a word.